The first time Koda dug behind the abandoned school, nobody paid attention. The second time, his handler started asking questions. By the third time, an entire Appalachian town couldn't stop talking about it. Because Koda wasn't some stray mutt wandering through weeds. He was a certified police canine, one of the best tracking dogs in eastern Kentucky. A dog trained to detect narcotics, locate missing people, follow scent trails miles through dense forest, and ignore distractions that would confuse most working dogs. And for reasons nobody could explain, he kept trying to tear up the ground behind a school that had been empty for nearly 20 years. At first, Deputy Rowan Mercer thought it was a coincidence. Then Koda nearly broke through a chain-link fence trying to get back there. And that was when Rowan realized something was very wrong. The town of Black Hollow sat tucked between ridges and forested hills in the eastern Appalachian Mountains. Most people driving through Kentucky never noticed it. A single main road, a gas station, a diner, a hardware store, several churches, and enough abandoned buildings to remind everyone that better days had come and gone. Coal had once built Black Hollow. Coal had once fed families. Coal had once filled Friday night football games and packed church pews. Then the mines closed, people left, stores disappeared. And little by little, the town began forgetting parts of itself. One of those forgotten places was Pine Ridge Elementary. The school sat at the edge of town behind overgrown maples and tangled brush. Its windows were boarded, its playground rusted. The blacktop basketball court had weeds, growing through cracks wide enough to swallow a shoe. Most residents barely looked at it anymore. The building had become part of the landscape, something old, something sad, something nobody wanted to think about, including Rowan Mercer, especially Rowan Mercer. Because Pine Ridge Elementary had once been his school, he had walked those hallways as a child, played kickball on that field, waited for his mother to pick him up near the front entrance. Now he drove past it every day without slowing down, like everyone else, until Koda changed everything. The call that started it all wasn't related to the school. It was a missing hiker, a 68-year-old retired mechanic named Walter Beach had wandered off a trail after a sudden thunderstorm. Search teams spent hours combing the woods. By dusk, Rowan and Koda joined the operation. The dog picked up Walter's scent immediately. Nose low, tail steady, focused, professional, exactly as trained. The trail led through wet forest and across a shallow creek before circling toward town. Searchers followed. Walter was found 3 hours later sitting beneath a rock overhang with a sprained ankle and mild hypothermia. Everyone celebrated. Case closed. Or at least it should have been, because while returning to his patrol vehicle, Koda suddenly stopped. His ears lifted, his body stiffened. Then he turned. Not toward the road, not toward Rowan, toward Pine Ridge Elementary. Koda, the dog, ignored him. Koda heeled, nothing. Then the shepherd lunged. Rowan barely held the leash. Koda pulled hard enough to drag him several feet through wet grass, straight toward the school's rear property line.
What in the world?
The dog reached the fence and began pawing frantically at the ground, digging, scratching, whining, not barking, not alerting the way narcotics dogs alert, not tracking. Something else, something Rowan had never seen before. After nearly a minute, Koda suddenly stopped, then calmly walked back as if nothing had happened. The entire incident felt strange, but dogs sometimes behaved oddly. Maybe there was an animal burrow, maybe a raccoon, maybe a fox. Rowan dismissed it for exactly 4 days. Then it happened again, this time during a routine patrol. The cruiser passed within a quarter-mile of Pine Ridge Elementary. Koda immediately jumped upright in the rear compartment, whining, pacing, pressing his nose against the window. The moment Rowan slowed at an intersection, the dog began barking, sharp, urgent, demanding. Koda settled. The shepherd wouldn't stop. When Rowan pulled into the school's gravel access road out of pure curiosity, the behavior intensified. The dog exploded from the vehicle the moment the door opened. Again, he ran to the same location behind the school. Again, he started digging. And this time, Rowan noticed something. The exact spot wasn't random. Koda wasn't searching a broad area. He wasn't moving around. Every paw strike landed within a few feet of the same location, as if he knew precisely where he wanted to dig. That bothered Rowan, because dogs didn't know locations like that without a reason. Training, scent, association, something. There was always something. He examined the ground. Nothing obvious. Just weeds, clay, tree roots, old leaves, no odors, no exposed objects, no disturbed soil, nothing. Yet Koda refused to leave. The shepherd whined continuously while staring at the earth, and for the first time Rowan felt a chill, not fear. Curiosity, the kind that starts small, then refuses to let go. The following week, Rowan mentioned it at the diner. Big mistake. Within 24 hours, everyone in Black Hollow had an opinion. It's probably an old septic tank. No, there's buried electrical lines. Maybe a dead deer. Maybe somebody hid moonshine there years ago. The theories spread. None made sense, especially because Koda only reacted at one specific spot. Not the surrounding area. Not nearby structures. Only there. Then an elderly woman named June Hollis said something that changed everything. The conversation fell silent when she spoke. That's where the music garden used to be. Several people frowned. What music garden? June blinked. The school garden. Nobody answered. She looked surprised. You all forgot? Apparently they had, because almost nobody under 50 remembered what she was talking about. June slowly stirred her coffee. There used to be a community project behind Pine Ridge. A garden. A special one. What kind? June shrugged. Children planted things there? Flowers? Some. What does that have to do with a police dog? She stared out the diner window. I don't know. Then she added something stranger. The project disappeared before it was finished. That got Rowan's attention. What do you mean disappeared? But June couldn't provide details. She remembered helping plant seedlings. Remembered children participating. Remembered local volunteers. Then her memories became frustratingly vague, like pages torn from a book. The conversation should have ended there, except 3 days later, Rowan visited the county archives and discovered June had been telling the truth. Buried among decades-old newspaper clippings sat a faded photograph. The headline read, "Community Heritage. Garden comes to Pine Ridge Elementary." The image showed smiling children holding small wooden signs, teachers standing nearby, rows of freshly turned soil. The article explained that students planned to create a living history, garden honoring local families and Appalachian traditions. Different sections would represent different generations. Each class would contribute something meaningful: plants, stories, artifacts, memories. A project designed to preserve local history before it vanished. According to the article, construction began in 2003, then abruptly stopped. No explanation. No follow-up article. No mention of completion. Nothing. It was as if the project simply vanished from public memory. Rowan photocopied everything. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would an entire town forget a project involving dozens of children? Why had it ended? And why was Koda obsessed with the exact location? The next morning brought another surprise. The school district's old maintenance records still existed. After several phone calls, Rowan obtained access. Most files were routine. Repairs, roof leaks, electrical work, pest control. Then he found something unusual, a handwritten note attached to a maintenance request. Date, September 2003. Location, rear garden area. Message, storage capsule missing. Search suspended pending further instruction. Rowan read it twice. Storage capsule missing. Search suspended. His pulse quickened, because suddenly Koda's behavior seemed less random. And for the first time, Rowan wondered if the dog wasn't trying to uncover something buried. Maybe he was trying to find something that had been lost. The problem was that none of it made sense. Dogs couldn't identify missing historical objects from 20 years ago. There had to be another explanation, a logical one. A scent. A contamination source. Anything. Yet every answer only created more questions. And Koda wasn't finished because 48 hours later, during another visit to the site, the dog uncovered the first real clue. A clue nobody in Black Hollow had seen in more than 2 decades. And the moment it emerged from the dirt, Rowan realized this mystery was far bigger than anyone imagined. Koda's paws struck something solid. A sharp scraping sound echoed beneath the soil. The dog froze, then began digging harder. Rowan dropped to one knee, brushed away dirt, and uncovered the corner of weathered metal. Not large, not a container. Just a small rusted plate. Carefully he lifted it free. The object measured roughly 6 inches long, covered in corrosion. Attached to one side was a faded brass tag. Most of the lettering had disappeared, but a few words remained visible. Pine Ridge Heritage Project, and beneath that, open in 2025. Rowan stared at the tag, then at Koda. The dog sat quietly beside him, tail still, eyes fixed on the hole, as if waiting for him to keep going. The mystery that had started with strange digging had suddenly become something much stranger. Because whatever had been hidden behind Pine Ridge Elementary, someone had expected it to stay buried for more than 20 years, and nobody in Black Hollow seemed to remember why. Rowan carried the rusted tag back to the sheriff's office, expecting somebody to recognize it. Nobody did. Not the sheriff, not the town clerk, not even the oldest dispatcher in the county, a woman who seemed capable of remembering every traffic stop and snowstorm since the late 1980s. The brass plate might as well have come from another town, yet the words etched into it were impossible to ignore. Open in 2025, not 2005, not 2010, not even 2020. Whoever created the heritage project had intended something to remain hidden for more than 2 decades. And 2025 had only recently passed. That night, Rowan spread copies of old documents across his kitchen table, the faded newspaper clipping, the maintenance request, the brass tag, several school board reports. Hours slipped by. Nothing connected. Then he noticed something strange. The names. The Heritage Garden article listed 27 student volunteers. A typical school project. But when Rowan compared those names with town records, he discovered something odd. Nearly half the families no longer lived in Black Hollow. That wasn't unusual. People moved away all the time. The unusual part was where they had gone. Most former residents scattered across Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, and West Virginia. But 8 families had all relocated within 2 years of each other. And every one of them had moved to the exact same city. Lexington, over 100 miles away. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. Rowan wasn't sure, but his instincts told him to keep digging. The following afternoon, he returned to Pine Ridge with Koda. Rain clouds hung low across the mountains. The old school looked even more abandoned than usual. Windows boarded, paint peeling, the empty playground swaying slightly in the wind. Koda immediately headed toward the same location. But this time his behavior changed. Instead of digging wildly, he began circling, slowly, methodically. His nose swept back and forth, tracking something. Following an invisible trail, Rowan watched carefully. The shepherd completed 3 circles, before stopping near a cluster of weeds, roughly 20 feet from the original hole. Then he pawed the ground once, twice, and sat. That was a trained alert, a deliberate one. Rowan grabbed a shovel from his cruiser. 10 minutes later, he struck wood. Not roots, not debris. Wood. Weathered and soft, he cleared away more dirt. A small rectangular box emerged. No larger than a shoebox. Its lid had collapsed from years underground. Inside lay dozens of water-damaged papers. Most had fused together. Many were unreadable, but a few survived. Rowan carefully separated them. Children's handwriting covered every page. Some contained drawings, some contained stories. Others held letters addressed to the future. A lump formed in Rowan's throat. Because these weren't historical artifacts. They were messages from children who had once walked the halls of Pine Ridge Elementary. One letter read, "If somebody finds this when I'm old, I hope Black Hollow still has the summer fair because that's my favorite day every year." Another said, "My grandpa says our town used to be full of music. I hope people don't forget." Another, "I want to be a veterinarian. Simple, honest, heartbreaking." The voices of children frozen in time. But none of this explained why Koda had become obsessed with the site. And then Rowan found a page that changed everything. The paper had been folded 3 times. Across the top were the words, Heritage Committee Notes. The handwriting belonged to an adult. Beneath it sat a list, not of objects, not of plants, not of donations, names. Dozens of names, families, residents, former miners, teachers, store owners, church volunteers, people who had helped build Black Hollow. At the bottom appeared a sentence, final recordings stored separately pending dedication ceremony. Rowan read it twice. Final recordings stored separately. His heart accelerated. The Heritage Garden wasn't just a garden. It had apparently been part of something larger, something involving recordings, voices, memories, history. And suddenly the missing storage capsule from the maintenance note seemed much more important. Because maybe the real project had never been the garden. Maybe the garden had simply marked where something else was hidden, something much bigger, something the town had forgotten. The next clue arrived from an unexpected source. 3 days later, Rowan received a phone call from a woman named Claire Madsen. She lived in Lexington, and she had seen a social media post about the brass tag. Apparently, one of the town residents had uploaded a photograph online. Claire sounded stunned. You found part of the Heritage Project? Do you know something about it? There was a long pause. Then she said something Rowan never expected. My father started it. Rowan nearly dropped the phone. Her father had been a music teacher at Pine Ridge Elementary during the early 2000s. A man named Theodore Madsen. Everyone called him Theo. Claire explained that Theo became obsessed with preserving local stories, not famous stories, not major historical events, ordinary people's memories. Coal miners talking about their first shifts underground, grandmothers describing Appalachian recipes, veterans sharing memories, musicians playing old mountain songs, teachers recounting school traditions. Theo believed Black Hollow was losing its identity. Young people were leaving. Older residents were dying. Entire chapters of local history were disappearing. So he created the Heritage Project. Students interviewed residents, recorded conversations, collected photographs, gathered family stories. Hundreds of hours of material. Rowan listened carefully. Then what happened? Silence. Claire exhaled. My father died. The words hung heavy between them. Theo had suffered a sudden heart attack shortly before the project's completion. Only 47 years old. His death shocked the community. Funding disappeared. School leadership changed. The project stalled. Then the district faced budget problems. Within a few years, Pine Ridge Elementary closed permanently. And eventually everyone moved on. Except nobody knew what happened to the recordings. They vanished? Rowan asked. That's what everyone assumed. Claire's voice softened. My father spent 3 years collecting those stories. Do you know where he stored them? No. Any records? No. What about family notes? We searched after he died. Nothing. The recordings had effectively disappeared. Thousands of voices. Hundreds of memories. Gone. For over 20 years. When the call ended, Rowan sat motionless. Outside his office window, clouds rolled over the mountains. Inside his mind, pieces finally started aligning. A forgotten project. Missing recordings. A hidden capsule. A dog obsessed with one location. But one question remained. Why now? Why would Koda suddenly react after decades? The answer arrived the very next morning. And it came from Koda himself. The department had scheduled a routine training, exercise near the old school grounds. Nothing unusual. Several officers participated, tracking drills, search patterns, basic exercises. During one scenario, Koda unexpectedly broke formation. Not far, only 50 yards, but enough to surprise everyone. The shepherd sprinted toward a stand of trees behind the school. Rowan chased after him. Koda! The dog ignored the command. He stopped beside an enormous maple tree near the edge of the property. A tree older than the school itself. Older than many houses in town. Koda planted his nose against the trunk, then began barking, not at the ground, at the tree, repeatedly. Urgently, Rowan approached. At first he saw nothing. Then sunlight caught something embedded in the bark. Metal, a small object partially swallowed by decades of growth. Using a pocket knife, Rowan carefully removed it. A tarnished aluminum marker, no bigger than a business card. words barely visible, yet still readable. And when Rowan deciphered the engraving, every hair on his arm stood up because the marker didn't identify the tree. It wasn't a memorial plaque. It wasn't a dedication. It was a direction, a single sentence. An instruction left behind 22 years earlier. It read, "When the music returns, follow the roots." Rowan stared at the words, confused. Music returns? Follow the roots? It sounded like a riddle. Something a teacher might create for children. But Theo Madsen had been a music teacher. And suddenly Rowan wondered if the entire Heritage Project had been designed around clues, not because anyone expected it to disappear, but because Theo had wanted students to discover it someday. The question was whether the final clue still existed. And if it did, where exactly would those roots lead? As it turned out, Black Hollow was about to discover that its forgotten past wasn't buried underground at all. It had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. And Koda was getting closer with every step. For the next week, Rowan Mercer became obsessed. Not with solving a crime, not with making headlines, but with understanding why a highly trained police K-9 had become fixated on a forgotten school project that had vanished more than 20 years earlier. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. The brass tag, the buried letters, the missing recordings, the strange message hidden inside the maple tree. When the music returns, follow the roots. It sounded poetic, maybe even childish. But Rowan had spent enough years in law enforcement to know that people rarely hide instructions without a purpose, especially teachers trying to leave something for future generations. And the more he learned about Theodore Madsen, the less random everything seemed. Theo wasn't remembered as a typical music teacher. Every person Rowan interviewed described him the same way: creative, stubborn, passionate, the kind of teacher who stayed late, the kind who spent his own money on student projects, the kind who believed children deserved to inherit more than textbooks. One former student laughed while recalling him. He used to say stories were more valuable than money. Another said Mr. Madsen thought memories could disappear forever if nobody protected them. A retired librarian added something interesting. He was always worried the town would forget itself. That sentence stayed with Rowan because Black Hollow had forgotten itself. Maybe not entirely, but enough. The coal boom years, the local musicians, the church picnics, the summer festivals. The stories passed down through generations. Most younger residents barely knew any of it. And if Theo had truly spent years collecting those memories, then losing the recordings wasn't just unfortunate, it was a tragedy. The deeper Rowan dug into the past, the more personal the mystery became, and Koda somehow kept pushing him forward. The shepherd's behavior hadn't stopped. In fact, it had become even stranger. Each time they visited Pine Ridge Elementary, Koda seemed less interested in digging and more interested in following specific paths around the property. Sometimes he would stop near old fence posts, sometimes near trees, sometimes beside chunks of cracked sidewalk, as though he were connecting invisible dots. And one rainy Thursday afternoon, he led Rowan to the next clue. It happened near the rear corner of the property, a section almost completely hidden by brush. Most people would never notice it. A rusted metal sign lay half buried beneath vines. Rowan cleared away leaves. The sign had once pointed toward something. The lettering was faded, but still visible. Heritage Trail. Arrow. Rowan froze. Trail? Nobody had ever mentioned a trail. The newspaper articles hadn't mentioned a trail. School records hadn't mentioned a trail. Yet there it was, physical proof. Something else connected to the project. The arrow pointed toward the woods. Dense Appalachian forest stretched beyond the school property. Tall oaks, maples, beeches, thick undergrowth. The kind of terrain where old paths disappear quickly. Koda immediately pulled toward it. His tail stiffened. His ears rose, and Rowan felt that familiar surge of anticipation. Because whenever Koda acted like this, another piece of the mystery usually appeared. The trail itself had almost vanished. Years of neglect had reclaimed it. Branches covered sections. Roots broke through the soil. Moss swallowed old stepping stones, but traces remained, enough to follow. About 200 yards into the woods, Rowan spotted the first marker, a wooden post, rotting, leaning sideways. Carved into its surface was a simple musical note, nothing else. No explanation, no text, just a note. A little farther ahead sat another marker, another musical symbol, then another, and another, like breadcrumbs. The deeper Rowan traveled, the stranger the trail became. Every marker featured music. Not history, not heritage, music, which brought him back to the message hidden in the maple tree. When the music returns, follow the roots. For the first time, he wondered if that wasn't a metaphor. Maybe Theo had literally created a trail based on music. But why? And where did it lead? The answer appeared almost half a mile from the school. Hidden within a grove of old trees, a small wooden structure stood among the shadows. Not a cabin, not a shed, more like a tiny outdoor stage. Weathered but still standing, rows of crude benches faced it. Leaves covered everything. Nature had nearly erased the place, yet it was unmistakably man-made. Rowan stared in disbelief. An outdoor amphitheater, behind an abandoned elementary school, deep in the woods. And apparently nobody remembered it existed. Koda rushed ahead, sniffing, searching, excited. The stage itself looked ancient, hand-built, simple, but surprisingly sturdy. Rowan climbed onto it. The wood creaked beneath his boots. Near the center sat a rusted metal plaque. Most of the lettering had survived. He brushed away dirt, then read aloud. The Black Hollow Story Circle. Below it, dedicated to future generations. And beneath that, every voice matters. Theo Madsen. The date, 2003. Rowan felt a chill, not fear. Something else. Sadness. Because standing there, surrounded by silent woods, he could suddenly imagine what this place had once been. Children sitting on benches, elders sharing stories, musicians playing mountain songs, families gathered beneath the trees, an entire community preserving itself. And then silence. 20 years of silence. Koda suddenly barked. Rowan turned. The shepherd stood beside one of the benches, pawing furiously at the ground underneath. There it was again, that urgency. That certainty. Rowan hurried over. Together they pulled away leaves and debris. A wooden compartment was hidden beneath the bench, cleverly concealed. Almost impossible to notice. Rowan opened it, empty. At first. Then he noticed something wedged into the back corner. A small waterproof tube, the kind hikers sometimes use to protect maps. His hand shook slightly as he unscrewed the cap. Inside sat a single folded document, remarkably preserved. Rowan unfolded it carefully. The page contained a hand-drawn map. At the top appeared Theo Madsen's signature. Below that, Heritage Project Final Plan. Rowan's pulse accelerated. This was it. The first real blueprint. The first evidence explaining how everything connected. The map showed multiple locations. The school, the garden, the amphitheater, the maple tree. Several points along the trail, each connected by lines, almost like a scavenger hunt. Or a network. At the bottom sat a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but it remained legible. If these stories are ever forgotten, the children will know where to find them. Rowan read the sentence 3 times, then a 4th. The children will know where to find them. Not adults, not administrators, children. Theo had deliberately hidden clues, deliberately scattered them across the project. Why? Because he expected the project to outlive him. The realization hit Rowan like a truck. Theo never intended a single time capsule. He never intended one storage container. He created an entire discovery system, a trail, a puzzle, a series of clues designed to guide future students. It wasn't just preservation, it was participation. Future generations would uncover the town's history themselves, piece by piece, exactly the way Rowan was doing now. Except something had interrupted the process. Theo died, the school closed, the project was forgotten, and the chain broke. For 22 years, until a police dog started digging. But one mystery still remained unsolved. The biggest mystery. Where were the recordings? The map showed locations, clues, landmarks, yet no final storage site, no obvious answer. Rowan studied the page repeatedly. Then he noticed something strange. Tiny symbols appeared beside several landmarks. Musical notes. Different positions. Not random, intentional. His eyes widened. Music. Again. Theo was leaving instructions through music. The same theme repeated everywhere. The trail markers. The message in the tree. The story circle. The music teacher. Suddenly, Rowan understood one thing. The key wasn't hidden underground. The key wasn't physical. It was encoded. Somewhere inside the musical symbols. Somewhere inside the project itself. But Rowan couldn't read music. Not beyond the basics, which meant he needed help. The next day, he contacted the one person who might understand. Claire Madsen, Theo's daughter. When she arrived from Lexington 2 days later, she carried a worn cardboard box. Inside were her father's personal notebooks, music journals, lesson plans, sketches, ideas, things nobody had examined in years. Together they spread everything across tables inside the town library. Hours passed. Then Claire suddenly stopped turning pages. Wait, Rowan looked up. She was staring at one notebook. Her expression had changed. What is it? Claire swallowed, then pointed toward a handwritten entry dated March 2003. Theo had written, "History should not be stored in one place." Another line appeared beneath it. "Songs survive because people learn them." Rowan felt his heart accelerate. Claire turned another page. More notes. More ideas. Then a sentence that made both of them go silent. "The recordings will rest where the music began." Neither spoke for several seconds, because for the first time, they had a direct clue. Not a metaphor, not a theory. A destination, somewhere in Black Hollow, a place where the music began. The problem was that nobody knew what that meant, and before they could figure it out, another discovery would completely change the direction of the investigation. Because hidden inside Theo's notebooks was something nobody expected. A list of names. Not students, not teachers, not volunteers. Musicians. Dozens of them, people connected to a piece of Black Hollow history the town had almost completely forgotten. And that forgotten history was about to reveal exactly why Koda had been trying so desperately to lead them. Here all along. Claire stared at the list for a long moment before speaking. "These aren't random names." Rowan looked closer. The notebook page contained nearly 40 entries. Each name had a year beside it. Some included handwritten notes. Some had check marks. Others had small stars. At first glance, it looked like a roster. Then Claire pointed to one of the names. "My grandfather talked about him." "Who?" "Elias Boone." The name meant nothing to Rowan. Claire flipped through another notebook. A photograph slid out. Black and white. Old. Very old. Several men stood outside a wooden building holding instruments. A fiddle. A banjo, a mandolin. Someone had written a date on the back, 1954. Below it, Black Hollow Community Music Hall. Rowan frowned. "Music hall?" Claire nodded slowly. "I think my father mentioned this once." "What was it? A gathering place? For concerts?" "Not exactly." She studied the photo. In mountain towns, especially decades ago, music wasn't just entertainment. It was community. Families gathered. People shared stories, passed down songs, recorded local history through music. Rowan looked back at the notebook, and suddenly another piece clicked into place. The story circle. The music-themed clues. The message about history surviving like songs. Theo hadn't randomly chosen music. He believed music was the strongest carrier of memory. The strongest way to preserve stories, which meant the phrase, "where the music began," might refer to an actual place, not a metaphor, a location, a building, somewhere in Black Hollow. The problem was that nobody remembered a music hall. The next several days turned into a town-wide search. Rowan interviewed retirees, church elders, former teachers, old business owners. Most had never heard of it. A few vaguely remembered dances decades ago. Others mentioned community gatherings, but nobody knew where the building had stood. Then, 82-year-old Luther Griggs solved the mystery. Luther lived alone on a hillside overlooking town. His memory wasn't perfect, but when Rowan showed him the photograph, his eyes widened instantly. "Well, I'll be. You know it?" "Of course I do." He tapped the image. "Used to stand near Miller Creek." Rowan exchanged a glance with Claire. "Where exactly?" Luther laughed. "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" "Flood took it."
Apparently in 1977, a massive flood tore through part of Black Hollow. Several structures were destroyed, including the old music hall. Most residents relocated afterward. The building disappeared. The stories faded. Eventually, people stopped talking about it. Exactly the kind of forgotten history Theo had spent years trying to preserve. But Luther remembered one more thing. Something unexpected. The foundation's probably still there. Rowan leaned forward. Foundation. Stone foundation. Creek couldn't move that. That was all they needed. The following morning, Rowan and Claire drove toward Miller Creek. Koda sat in the rear compartment, unusually alert. The route followed a narrow mountain road winding through forest and old farmland. Eventually, they reached a clearing. Nothing obvious remained. No building. No ruins. No sign a music hall had ever existed. Just trees, grass, and the sound of running water. Then Koda reacted. Immediately, the shepherd stood upright, whining, tail rigid. The same behavior Rowan had witnessed behind the school. Except stronger, much stronger. Koda. The dog jumped from the cruiser. His nose hit the ground, and he took off. Rowan barely kept pace. The shepherd crossed the clearing, moved through brush, then stopped beside a cluster of moss-covered stones. The old foundation. Luther had been right. Most people would have missed it. Nature had reclaimed nearly everything, but traces remained. Stone outlines, broken sections of wall, pieces of history hidden beneath decades of growth. And Koda was locked onto it. The shepherd circled repeatedly, nose working non-stop. Then he headed toward the creek. 20 yards, 30, 40, before stopping beside a massive sycamore tree, one larger than any Rowan had seen near town. Its roots twisted across the ground like giant wooden ropes. Koda barked once, twice, then began pawing between two roots. Rowan felt a familiar surge of anticipation, because every time Koda did this, another piece of the mystery emerged. They cleared leaves, then soil, then more soil. A few inches down, Rowan's shovel struck metal. A dull clang echoed through the clearing. Everyone froze. There it was, another clue. But this one was different. The object was larger, far larger.
Carefully, they uncovered the top. A rectangular steel box. Weatherproof, heavy-duty, industrial. Nothing like the small containers found earlier. Claire covered her mouth. Oh my God. The box measured nearly 4 feet long. Whoever buried it intended it to survive, and somehow it had. For over 20 years. Rowan examined the lid. A brass plate remained attached. Though tarnished, the engraving was readable. The word sent a wave of emotion through both of them. Black hollow voices beneath it. For the children who come after us. Claire's eyes filled with tears. That's his handwriting. Neither spoke for several moments. Because after all these years, after all the forgotten clues and abandoned places and buried memories, they had finally found it. Or at least part of it. The lock had rusted badly. It took nearly an hour to open. When the lid finally lifted, everyone held their breath. Inside sat dozens of waterproof storage cases, neatly organized, protected, preserved, each labeled by year, family name, interview subject, music recordings, community stories, photographs, documents, hundreds upon hundreds of pieces of local history. Theo Madsen had done it. He had saved an entire town's memories. And somehow they survived. Claire began crying openly, not from sadness, relief. For 22 years, people assumed her father's work had vanished forever. Instead, it had been waiting patiently beneath a sycamore tree, exactly where he intended. Yet even in that emotional moment, Rowan noticed something strange. The box wasn't full. Several sections were empty, not damaged, not broken, empty, as though something had once occupied those spaces. Claire noticed, too. That's odd. What? She pointed. There should be more. You know that. My father kept duplicate indexes. She examined the labels. According to his records, we're missing at least 6 storage cases. Rowan stared into the container. The celebration immediately cooled. 6 missing cases. Why? Had someone removed them? Before burial? After burial? Was the collection incomplete? The answer arrived faster than expected. Because tucked beneath the remaining cases sat a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "If the collection is found." Rowan carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Theo, a final message. The paper shook slightly in Claire's hands as she read. The letter explained everything. Almost. Theo had feared placing the entire archive in one location. Floods, fire, accidents, time, anything could destroy it. So he divided the collection, Several storage cases remained at the main archive. Others were hidden elsewhere. A safeguard, a backup plan, a way to ensure the stories survived no matter what happened. The final sentence stunned everyone. The remaining voices belonged to those who never had a chance to tell their stories publicly. Rowan frowned. What did that mean? The letter didn't explain. No locations, no directions, nothing. Just that single cryptic statement. And suddenly the mystery wasn't over. Not even close. Because they had recovered most of Black Hollow's lost history. But not all of it. The most important recordings, the ones Theo specifically separated, were still missing, and for reasons nobody understood. Koda wasn't acting satisfied. The dog remained focused, alert, restless, as if he knew there was more. That evening, after the archive was transported safely to town, Black Hollow buzzed with excitement. News spread everywhere. People gathered at the diner, at churches, on front porches. Everyone talked about Theo's discovery. The town's lost memories were finally coming home, yet Rowan couldn't shake one thought. Koda, the shepherd, had located every major clue, every location, every turn in the investigation. But how? No dog could understand historical preservation. No dog could solve riddles. No dog could follow a 22-year-old treasure hunt. There had to be a practical explanation. And that explanation finally emerged while technicians began cataloging the recovered archive. Inside one of the cases, they found something nobody expected. Not recordings, not photographs, a scent log, a training record. And the moment Rowan read the first page, he understood exactly why Koda had started digging behind Pine Ridge Elementary. The answer wasn't magic. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't coincidence. It was something far more surprising, something that connected Koda directly to Theo Madsen's forgotten project in a way nobody could have imagined. And once Rowan learned the truth, he realized the dog hadn't accidentally discovered the mystery. In a way, Koda had been trained for it long before he was ever born. That night, long after most of Black Hollow had gone to sleep, Rowan sat alone in the evidence room. The recovered archive filled several tables, boxes, photographs, audio recordings, handwritten interviews, pieces of an entire town's memory. Yet Rowan's attention remained fixed on a single folder, the scent log, the training record. Neither belonged with the archive, neither looked historical, and both carried dates from 2003, more than 20 years before Koda was born. Rowan opened the folder again. The first page identified a volunteer organization that no longer existed, a regional search and rescue group based in eastern Kentucky. Beneath that sat a list of training materials, clothing samples, personal objects, fabric scent markers, standard items used to teach tracking dogs. Nothing unusual until Rowan reached the final pages. There, among dozens of entries, appeared something unexpected. Heritage Project interview subjects, names, addresses, collection dates, attached scent samples. Rowan blinked, then read it again. Attached scent samples. His pulse quickened. Theo hadn't merely collected stories. He had partnered with search and rescue volunteers, apparently as part of a community education event. Children learned how tracking dogs worked. Residents participated. Scent articles were collected for demonstrations. Entire classes attended. It sounded harmless, educational, completely ordinary, except for one detail. The scent materials were later stored alongside portions of the Heritage Project archive. Rowan suddenly sat upright because he finally understood. Not everything, but enough. If scent samples had been preserved inside the project, and if some of those materials remained intact, then traces could theoretically survive for years inside sealed containers. Not perfect, not strong, but detectable, especially to a dog. Especially to a highly trained tracking dog. Rowan immediately called the state's K9 training coordinator. The answer surprised him. Under the right conditions? Yes. Extremely faint scent traces could remain on preserved materials, particularly when protected from weather and contamination. Not common, not guaranteed, but possible. Rowan stared across the room at the recovered archive, then toward the dark window. Koda hadn't been following history. He'd been following scent. Tiny fragments, lingering traces, preserved unintentionally through decades. The dog wasn't solving riddles. The dog was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, following a trail that happened to lead through forgotten history. For the first time since the investigation began, Rowan had a realistic explanation, yet one mystery remained. The missing 6 cases, the recordings Theo separated, the voices that had never been heard publicly. And according to the letter, they still existed somewhere. The next breakthrough came 3 days later. Volunteers began digitizing portions of the recovered archive. Hundreds of recordings required cataloging. Rowan helped whenever possible. Most interviews were exactly what everyone expected. Family stories, local traditions, music, memories. Then Claire discovered something extraordinary. Hidden among the recordings was an interview with Theo himself, not intended for public release. More like a journal, a private explanation of the project's purpose. The recording quality crackled with age. Then Theo's voice filled the room. Calm, thoughtful, familiar somehow, despite Rowan never meeting him. Theo spoke about preserving stories, about community, about memory. Then his tone changed, more serious, more emotional. He explained that during interviews he kept encountering something unexpected. Regret. Over and over again. Not dramatic regrets. Not crimes. Not scandals. Ordinary regrets. People wishing they had thanked someone, apologized, reconciled, spoken truths before loved ones died. Stories they wanted future generations to hear. But many refused to record those conversations publicly. They were too personal, too painful, too private. So Theo created a separate collection, a protected archive. Not for history, for healing. The room fell silent. Claire stopped the recording. Nobody spoke, because suddenly the missing 6 cases made sense. They weren't historical records. They were unfinished emotional stories. Messages never delivered. Words people couldn't say face to face. Theo had preserved them anyway, hoping someday they might help someone. But where? Where had he hidden them? The answer emerged from a place nobody expected. Pine Ridge Elementary. Again. Specifically the old auditorium. The building had been abandoned for years, most of it inaccessible. But while reviewing construction documents, Rowan noticed something. The auditorium renovation plans from 2002. Theo had personally helped design portions of the space, including a project called the Listening Wall. Nobody remembered it, yet records confirmed it existed. A student art installation. One section of wall dedicated to community voices. The design included hidden compartments, educational exhibits, audio stations. Suddenly Rowan understood. Theo loved symbolism, music, stories, voices. If he wanted to hide recordings belonging to unheard people, where better than a wall designed for listening? 2 days later, engineers helped the town safely enter the deteriorating auditorium. Dust covered everything. Broken seats, faded curtains, silence. Decades of silence. Koda accompanied Rowan. The moment they entered, the shepherd became alert, very alert. His nose lifted, then lowered, then lifted again. Rowan felt excitement building. The dog moved through the auditorium aisle, past rows of seats, toward the rear wall, then stopped, directly beneath a massive mural painted by students 23 years earlier. Mountains, trees, rivers, music notes, families. The entire history of Black Hollow. Koda barked once, then sat. Rowan smiled. Good boy. Construction workers examined the wall. Hidden access panels eventually emerged behind portions of the artwork, exactly as old blueprints suggested. One by one they opened them. Empty, empty, empty. Then finally, a compartment near the center. Inside sat 6 waterproof storage cases. Perfectly preserved. Claire covered her mouth. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Rowan simply stared. After 22 years, the final archive had been found. Yet what happened next proved far more powerful than the discovery itself. Because when technicians opened the cases, they found something completely different from the main collection. No community histories. No public interviews, no festival recordings. Instead, each case contained private messages. Hundreds of them. Fathers speaking to children, children speaking to parents, friends speaking to friends. People sharing truths they never found courage to say in person. One man apologized to his brother after 20 years of silence. A grandmother recorded family recipes alongside life advice. A former miner described mistakes he hoped his grandchildren would avoid. A widow spoke to a son she feared was drifting away. Ordinary people, honest voices, human voices. Many individuals had since passed away. Some families had moved away. Others had lost touch entirely, yet their words remained. Waiting. The effect on Black Hollow was immediate. Families reunited. Long-forgotten memories resurfaced. Relationships healed. People traveled from multiple states to hear recordings. Some cried. Some laughed. Some sat silently for hours, listening, just listening. And for the first time in decades, the town began talking about its history again. Not the coal industry, not economics, not politics, people. The people who built the community, the people whose voices nearly disappeared. A month later, Black Hollow organized a public event at the restored Story Circle in the woods. Volunteers repaired benches, cleared trails, rebuilt signs. The forgotten amphitheater came alive again. Hundreds attended, more than anyone expected. Former residents returned from Kentucky cities, Tennessee, Ohio, West Virginia. Entire families gathered beneath the trees. Musicians played old mountain songs. Children read letters recovered from the capsule. Elders shared memories. For the first time in years, the town felt connected, whole, alive. And throughout the evening, Koda remained the center of attention. Everyone wanted photographs. Everyone wanted to pet the dog who started everything. The dog who refused to ignore a scent trail nobody else could see. Yet Rowan understood something deeper. Koda hadn't saved the town. Not alone. Theo had built the bridge. The community had walked across it. Koda simply showed them where to start. Near sunset, Claire approached Rowan carrying a small wooden box. "What's that?" she smiled. "Something my father would have wanted." Inside rested the original brass tag. The one Koda uncovered behind the school. The tag marked "Open in 2025. Claire turned it over. On the reverse side, hidden beneath years of corrosion, another inscription had finally been revealed during cleaning. Rowan read it slowly, then smiled, because the final message explained everything. It said, "Memories survive when someone chooses to listen." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of music drifted through the trees. Children laughed nearby. Elderly residents shared stories on the benches. Families sat together listening to recovered recordings. The very future Theo had imagined. Then Rowan looked toward Koda. The shepherd lay near the stage, watching the crowd. Calm. Content. As though his job was finally finished. Maybe it was. Because months later, after the archives were digitized and preserved, Black Hollow established a permanent community history center. School groups visited. Families donated photographs. New interviews were recorded every year. The collection continued growing, not because people feared forgetting, but because they finally understood the value of remembering. And whenever visitors asked how the entire project had been rediscovered, someone always pointed toward a framed photograph hanging near the entrance. The picture showed a German shepherd sitting proudly beside a hole behind an abandoned school, dirt on his paws, alert eyes. Ears forward. A dog staring at a mystery nobody else could see. Beneath the photograph sat a small plaque, not honoring a detective, not honoring a politician, not even honoring Theo Madsen. The plaque simply read, "Koda, the dog who helped the town hear its own voice again." And on quiet evenings, when the restored Story Circle filled with music drifting through the Appalachian trees, visitors sometimes noticed something remarkable. Children sitting beside grandparents, listening to recordings made decades earlier, hearing voices that should have been lost to time, learning stories that would otherwise have disappeared forever. And beyond the stage, near the edge of the woods, stood a weathered trail marker bearing a single carved musical note. A reminder that memories are fragile, that communities can forget, that history can fade, but also that sometimes healing begins in the most unexpected way imaginable, with a forgotten scent, an abandoned school, and one stubborn police canine who simply refused to stop digging.